Bulgaria is a tourist country in Southeast Europe. During the second half of the 20th century, it was a part of the Eastern Bloc alongside Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Romania. Today, Bulgaria is a member of the European Union. The capital, Sofia, is the 12th largest city in the European Union. It is also the second oldest capital in Europe, after Athens. The upsurge of the city started around the beginning of the 1st century AD, when it became a part of the Roman Empire. In the 2nd century, during the reign of Trajan, the city was named Olympia Serdica. In 285, it was declared the capital of the province. It was from Serdica that several of the most notable Roman rulers controlled the entire empire. The heyday of Serdica coincided with the most glorious period in the history of the Roman Empire. This period began with the reign of Emperor Trajan, who ruled the empire between 98 AD and 117 AD. At that time, the empire spread over millions of square kilometers, from today's Scotland to Iraq and Iran, from Armenia to Tunisia and Morocco. It was the first time in history that the Roman Empire covered such a vast area. And the last. For over 200 years after the death of Trajan in 117, the Roman Senate saluted each emperor with the wish that he might be more fortunate than Augustus and better than Trajan. Felicior Augusto, melior Traiano. Trajan is one of the rulers known as the Five Good Emperors. Thanks to them, the empire not only thrived as never before, but for the first time in history it was governed similarly to contemporary European ideals, authority without repressions and abuse. Rome set the foundations of the modern European civilization. In 29 AD, the official acronym for the Roman government was coined SPQR, meaning Senatus Populusque Romanus, the Senate and People of Rome. The last of the five good emperors was Marcus Aurelius Antonius. He died in 180, but the glory of Serdica as a main Roman city was yet to come. The empire had now spread over an unprecedented area. The barbarian tribes were trying to reclaim the occupied territories and settle there. It became impossible for one person to reign over the empire successfully. By the end of the 3rd century, Emperor Diocletian was convinced that authority must be divided between 4 rulers: 2 senior co-emperors called Augusti, and 2 junior co-emperors, Caesars. It was a logical decision, but paradoxical nonetheless. It was this division of power that led to the decline of the great Roman Empire. Its time was over. By the death of Emperor Constantine the Great, the capital was Constantinople, and the emperor's 3 sons were mortal enemies. But the fall of the Roman Empire was the beginning of a new era, the Middle Ages, and its symbol became the Eastern Roman Empire, which historians later called Byzantium. As it turned out, the Roman Empire was much more viable without Rome. The Byzantine Empire survived over 10 centuries. Constantine the Great became its patron, its founding father. In addition, he was the first Roman emperor to adopt Christianity after centuries of persecutions of Christians. He is revered as a saint in the Eastern Orthodox Church because he is the first monarch who actively fought hatred and oppression. His favorite city was located about 600 kilometers to the west from the capital of Constantinople. It was called Olympia Serdica, and the emperor is known to have often said, "Serdica is my Rome." It is said that traditionally, in the eastern Roman provinces, the western gate was the main gate of the city. It faced Rome. The western gate of Olympia Serdica. The territory of today's city was populated as early as the 6th century BC. Remains of a prehistoric settlement were found in the Slatina community, about 4 to 5 kilometers away from downtown Sofia. A few millennia later, a Thracian tribe populated the area around the building of the presidency, the Soom department store, the Sheraton Hotel, and what was to become the Western Gate. Around the 9th century BC, the Thracian Serdi tribe founded a city called Sardanapalus, or Sredets. These were biblical times. It was around the same time that Solomon became king of Israel, and the Indians first defined the concept of zero as a number. Why did the enigmatic Thracians choose to settle in an area known for its hot summers and severe winters? The local climate is similar to that of New York, minus 20 degrees Celsius in winter and up to 40 degrees in the summer. There could be only one reason: the miraculous mineral springs. Many scientists claim that this place is unique. In Serdica, there were more than 50 mineral springs of 8 different varieties. Typically, in any region blessed with mineral springs, there are no more than 2 or 3 kinds. The water from the springs in Serdica cured a wide range of diseases. Plus, in a city with plenty of hot water, between 30 and 90 degrees Celsius, life is easy and pleasant. But the Roman legions did not come to Serdica in search of pleasures. They saw it as the shortest route to the Aegean Sea, an embayment of the Mediterranean Sea. The Romans called the land route from Western to Eastern Europe and the Middle East Via Diagonalis, the diagonal road. But although the Romans built Via Diagonalis, or Via Militaris, the military route, as they also called it, it was not them who used it first. It was part of the Silk Route, and was used in pre-Roman times during the reign of Alexander the Great, and even for millennia before that, by troops, merchants, and nomads. Via Diagonalis passes through modern Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Turkey, and continues into Asia. The capitals of 5 countries were located along this route. The troops of Philip II of Macedon and Alexander the Great marched along it in their military campaigns. It's no wonder that Serdica quickly became one of the most important cities between the Aegean Sea and the Danube River. For an amateur archaeologist like me, this place is a paradise. Underneath us lies layer upon layer of history. I'm literally stepping on pieces of the antiquity, the Middle Ages, and the Ottoman rule. Unfortunately, also a post-communist landfill site. But that's just the way it is. Sooner or later, all of us are just dust in the wind. In just a few years, Serdica grew and turned into a typical Roman city. The Romans erected the largest amphitheater on the Balkan Peninsula. Built thermae, a water conduit, a drainage system, and of course, a classical Decumanus Maximus, the main street of every Roman city. Typically, it was east-west oriented. The Decumanus Maximus of Serdica reached today's Don Ducov Boulevard. The primary north-south oriented road in a Roman city was called a Cardio Maximus. Both of these main streets started and ended at the city gates. These are the gates in the city walls. The inner walls surrounded what we could call the Roman downtown. Here were the main political institutions and the central square. Here's where the big money was. Serdica also manufactured coins. Usually, the foreigners entered the city through the western gate. It was the main city gate and a kind of a border checkpoint. In order to enter the civilized world, you would have to convince the officials that you were a Roman citizen or would be of socially useful service. Serdica even had its own mint. If you were a Hun, a Saxon, or some other barbarian, by the Roman standards, the Western Gate was something like today's Schengen area. Everyone dreamed of a city with paved streets, sewerage, and most importantly, excellent commerce. These excavations are extremely important as a source of information about the history of the Bulgarian capital. The first archaeological trenches with regard to the Western Gate were made here in 1975. But in the Eastern Bloc, this was the height of the Brezhnev era. At that time, every aspect of life in Bulgaria was subjected to the communist ideology, the demonstrations of military power, and the subjection of the individual to the collective. The regime would rather display portraits of the party leaders than bas-reliefs of ancient emperors. To make way for the ceremonial processions, the leaders of the Bulgarian Communist Party decided to demolish the oldest continuously operating church in Europe, the St. George Rotunda, which was over 1,700 years old. The archaeologist Magdalena Stancheva was the one to talk them out of this preposterous idea. She was the first to start excavations of the Western Gate. The remains of the Eastern Gate were discovered, and archaeologists managed to preserve the 11th century church St. Petka Samardziska, which had been erected on top of an ancient Roman tomb.
In that point of the excavations, we discovered the West Gate with two towers in the two sides of the gate, and the beginning of the most important street in direction east-west called the Cumanus. Near the Western Gate, we discovered a little building, maybe the customs of the city.
There is still a lot of work to be carried out on the remains of Serdica. The city walls were finished around 180 AD, during the rule of co-emperors Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Aurelius Commodus. The city walls enclosed an area of 164,000 square meters, but this space was insufficient for the rapidly developing city. Buildings were being erected outside the walls, which necessitated the construction of a second fortification wall. Both walls are about 8 or 9 meters high and 2.5 meters thick. Today, some of the most successful Bulgarian archaeologists are working on the Western Gate of Olpia Serdica. Several distinguished Bulgarian archaeologists work here. Ileana Borisova, Andrei Alajov, Snezhana Goryanova, and Milena Raicheva. Andrei has been working for years on the excavation of the first Bulgarian capital, Pliska, which was founded in the 7th century. He's been going through the layers of history throughout the country as well, and over the years has been communicating more with the dead inhabitants of the Bulgarian territories than with his contemporaries. Ileana is a professor in ancient history at the Sophia University. She's an expert in archaeological museums in situ. That is, archaeological museums on the site of the excavation. This new type of museum became popular as late as the 19th century and is probably the most romantic part of the science of history. Milena is one of the bright young hopes of Bulgarian archaeology. Buried in the center of Sofia lies a part of the history of Europe. The news that the excavations are about to be resumed quickly stirred the public interest. One of the first visitors to the site was the mayor of Geneva, Pierre Maldet. Archaeologists with various backgrounds and beliefs are unanimous. The Western Gate will give us the most thorough idea of what life was like in ancient times, and later as a medieval city. Journalists from all major media outlets attended the press conference several days later. Several layers of history lie underneath my feet. Several periods. Almost 17 centuries worth, or so we know for now. But you know what's frightening is that Roman golden cestri from the 2nd century may be lying buried under an Ottoman outhouse from the 17th century. But to get to them, one would have to dig through the Middle Ages. You know, maybe that's why people decide to specialize in more recent history. How many layers from different periods are there in the soil of this city, famous for its karst springs?
Besides the scary remains of the Thracian culture, there are numerous features: classical and late antiquity, the Middle Ages, and Ottoman rule, plus some communistic and post-communistic times. Of course, the most valuable are the ancient Roman and medieval finds.
When we first hear about an archaeological expedition, the first thing we always want to know is what finds and what treasures could be uncovered.
It's a bit different here, but every excavation is a chance for attractive finds.
Having in mind the fact that Ulpia Serdica had its own mint, we could easily guess what kinds of coins will be found. The archaeologist's main goal is different: to create an open-air museum showing another part of the history of ancient Sofia. The Western Gate, where the living meet the dead. The gate itself speaks about the living and the dead, the victorious and the defeated. There's an inscription marking the construction of the wall. It's in ancient Greek and reads as follows.
Agateteuche, hoi megistoi kai theotatoi autocratores Caesares Marcus Aurelius Antoninus Sebastos Germanicos Sarmaticos pater Patridus Archiereus Megistus kai.
There's an identical inscription on the northern gate of Serdica. Together with the one on the western gate, these are the only two such inscriptions found within the boundaries of the Roman Empire. But why was a Roman epigraph from the 2nd century written in ancient Greek instead of Latin?
Most of the inscriptions in ancient Serdica were written in Old Greek. It's not a mistake, nor is it accidental.
Greek was the official language in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. This was a pragmatic decision. It would have been counterproductive to introduce the totally unfamiliar Latin in areas where most of the population's first, or at least second language, was Greek. They would have seriously burdened and hampered both the administration and everyday life. The town of Montana is about the same longitude as Sofia, some 100 kilometers to the north. Yet in Roman times, the people who lived and worked there spoke Latin, right?
Right. Montana was actually quite different than Serdica because it was a fort. It was a place where auxiliary military units such as cohorts were stationed, and the official language in the inscriptions was Latin because of the army. That's why Montana was much more similar to the western part of the empire than to the rest of Thrace.
Throughout history, Serdica was part of several states, each with its own culture and economic interests. The city founded by the Thracians was later part of the Roman Empire, the First Bulgarian Kingdom, Byzantium, the Second Bulgarian Kingdom, the Ottoman Empire, and the contemporary Bulgarian state. Once you pass through the Western Gate, you'll witness, gathered in just an area of a few small kilometers, the history of the Balkan Peninsula and Eastern Europe. Remember that this access connects Sarajevo, Ljubljana, Zagreb, Belgrade, Sofia, and Ankara, the Via Diagonalis. According to the rules of archaeology, the cultural layers are uncovered in successive mechanical layers, each 20 centimeters deep. 1 meter down, you could find the remains of 5 different periods, or even 10, or maybe just 1. The geodesist is busy drawing a grid plan of the site. Archaeology students are also involved in the excavations. In order to master the trade, they are here every day as early as 8 a.m., despite the chilly October and November weather. Another group of dedicated people also works here, men of the legendary Седем. leader of the tireless brigadiers. Here, brigadier is not an army term, but rather a socialist era term, meaning small group of laborers. And these laborers still use the same wheelbarrows as they did in the 1950s, with the help of which the enraptured, undeviating youth tried to overturn the unjust capitalist system. The upsurge of Serdica began in the 2nd century, when the city was part of the Roman Empire. At that time, the Roman emperors were convinced that violence cannot be the empire's leading principle. Their new motto was, authority without repressions and abuse. In the 2nd century, such liberal ideas were rather incomprehensible for the masses, but very well received nonetheless. Thus began the history of modern Europe. Living in Serdica in the 2nd century must have been quite safe and pleasant.
Some of the best mineral waters are obtained from the springs in the region of Sophia.
Hey, you remember those mineral springs with 30-degree water, right? During the 2nd century AD, the Roman Empire was led by one of the most successful rulers in its history. Marcus Aurelius brought back the ancient Greek principles that Romans have always admired. He wrote the popular series of 12 philosophical books, To Myself, and became the personification of Plato's definition of the philosopher king. Marcus Aurelius was amongst the first monarchs who based their state strategy on the principles of social policy. He was a merciful ruler, with limited and modest public appearances.
Many foreigners settled down at the borderlines of the empire during the reign of Marcus Aurelius. At the same time, he was one of the emperors to wage the most wars. He was hardly ever in Rome. Life is a warfare, and a stranger's sojourn, and after fame is oblivion. These are his words.
But Marcus Aurelius made one grave mistake. He chose his son Lucius Aurelius Commodus for his successor. Up until that moment, the new emperor had always been appointed based on his skills and abilities, instead of his direct lineage to the previous ruler. The first 4 good emperors followed this tradition, and Commodus was the exception.
He, however, revived another Roman tradition. He lived a life of debauchery and waste. Courtesans, actors, and libertines were his usual companions. And although he, or his generals rather, did win a couple of battles, it was Commodus' troops who brought plague to Rome.
Gaius Aurelius Diocletian ruled between 284 and 305 AD. The Roman Empire was now on the brink of collapse, struggling with internal problems and barbarian invasions. Diocletian introduced a complex administrative system of government called the Tetrarchy, under which Rome was ruled by 4 emperors at the same time. These were very hard times for the Christians, with the repressions against them intensifying under Diocletian's successor Gaius Galerius Maximinus. Galerius was based in Serdica. Towards the end of his life, he is believed to have received a kind of divine enlightenment and issued the Edict of Toleration. Serdica was about to become one of the strongholds of Christianity worldwide. Galerius' successor was Flavius Valerius Constantinus. He would leave a bright mark in history under the name of Constantine I, or the first emperor of the Byzantine Empire. The Orthodox Church called him a saint, but even the opponents of his sanctity used the title the Great after his name. For strategic reasons, he decided to move the Roman capital to the eastern part of the empire. Initially, he was inclined to choose between Serdica and Nicomedia, modern Izmit in Turkey, but finally settled upon Byzantium, or Constantinople. Constantinople was another one of the eternal cities, just like Rome. In the 4th century AD, Serdica was a real polis. With a population between 100 and 200,000 citizens, it was significantly larger and more prosperous than the new Roman capital of Byzantium. Despite his decision, Constantine remained forever enamored of Serdica. During his reign, the city gradually turned into the empire's spiritual capital. Constantine had the St. Georgi Rotund built, which today, at 1700 years of age, is the oldest functioning church in the world. About 500 meters away stands another symbol of the Roman presence in the Bulgarian capital. The Basilica of St. Sophia was constructed around the same time. Its location was chosen because of the proximity to the amphitheater, where thousands of Christians died in the arena. The church also served as a martyrium, a mausoleum for the martyrs. Additional constructions altered its appearance several times over the centuries, but after the restoration, today it looks just as it did 1400 years ago. The Basilica and the Rotunda were two of the major locations of the series of synods, called the Council of Serdica. This council was of vital importance to the future of Christianity. 318 bishops from all around the Roman Empire gathered in Serdica and defined a doctrine fundamental for Christianity, the Holy Trinity doctrine. The council was called for by the sons of Constantine the Great, Emperors Constantius and Constans. Their father had already defined some of the principles of modern European civilization. For the first time in history, marriage by capture was abolished. The rights of the master over his slaves were restricted. Prisoners could no longer be held in complete darkness. Everyone who gathered taxes over the authorized amount was subject to the death penalty. Gladiatorial games were abolished, and Sunday was declared a day of rest. There is another basilica called St. Sophia, the most famous St. Sophia in the world. It is in Istanbul. The current structure of the Hagia Sophia was built in the 6th century, under the rule of Emperor Justinian I, as a seat of the Orthodox Patriarch of Constantinople. Justinian also restored St. Sophia in Serdica, a city that was invaded numerous times by the Huns, Visigoths, and Slavs in the 5th and the 6th centuries, during the migration period. Justinian renamed it to Serdica Triadica because he believed that after the Second Ecumenical Council, this was the city that served to affirm the concept of the Holy Trinity. Triadica in Greek. At the end of the 7th century, the Byzantines lost a series of battles against the united troops of the Slavic and Bulgar tribes that had begun to settle in the Balkans. The peace treaty, signed by Emperor Constantine IV Pogonatos and the Bulgar ruler Khan Asparukh in 681, is considered to be the establishment of the Bulgarian state. Around 40 years later, the Bulgarians, together with the Romanoi, put up a resolute resistance against the troops of the Arabic Caliphate headed towards Constantinople. They slew 20,000 Arabs, thus saving not only Constantinople, but the whole of Europe from the Arab invasion. But the conflict between the young Bulgarian state and the Byzantine Empire was predestined. The Bulgarians were no match for the Byzantines. Thus, in the 8th century, Serdica was still one of the most important cities of the empire, and a point of interest to the new star of the European political stage, the Bulgarian Khan Krum. His military achievements made him a worthy rival to the eminent king of the Franks, Charlemagne. He was also compared to another of his contemporaries, Harun al-Rashid, whose wisdom made him one of the main characters in the 1001 Nights collection of folk tales.
Remember, Charlemagne was the first great man of action to emerge from the darkness after the collapse of the Roman world. Those are Kenneth Clark's words.
At that time, the Frankish kingdom of Charlemagne, Byzantium, and Bulgaria were the only states in Europe. They bordered one another along the mighty river Danube. The conflict was inevitable. In 807, the Byzantine Emperor Nicephorus I Genikos led a campaign with the aim of conquering Bulgaria, but internal problems forced him to return to Constantinople, and Khan Krum initiated a counterattack. In 809, he besieged Serdica, but the fortress proved to be impassable. the Bulgarian ruler promised the 6,000 soldiers in the garrison that if they surrender, he would let them return safely to Constantinople.
The relations between the two states were always marked with hypocrisy and perfidy.
Prüm changed the name of Serdica to the Slavic Sredets. In the 11th century, Byzantium conquered the Bulgarian kingdom, along with Serdica. At different times, the city was plundered by Serbs, Magyars, and Crusaders. At the end of the 12th century, the Bulgarians managed to restore their independence and to win Serdica back. In the following century, Europe saw the beginning of the Spanish Reconquista, and the first college in Cambridge was founded. In the 14th century, Bulgarians called the city with its present-day name, Sofia, after the Church of Saint Sophia, which means Holy Wisdom. And in the end of the same century, Bulgaria fell under the might of the aggressive Ottoman Empire, and remained under it for more than 500 years.
Right here in this bay is where the fall of the Byzantine Empire began.
Sofia is the city which fought longest and hardest before it fell in the hands of the invaders.
The most influential sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Suleiman the Magnificent, the lawgiver, also fell in love with the city. He loved to rest here before and after the battles he fought in Central Europe. But Sofia lacked the spirit of the Orient, so Suleiman had his most prominent architect, Koca Mimar Sinan Aga, design a mosque. Sinan was greatly influenced by Byzantine architecture. Selimiye-Jami, in the town of Odrin, is one of the most prominent masterpieces of the architect Sinan. The creator of the Suleiman Mosque in Constantinople once again proved his talent in Sofia. In 1528, the construction of the Koca Mehmed Pasha Mosque was finished. Today, it is the Christian Orthodox Church Sveti Sedmochislenici. Archaeologists with various interests work together on an area of only 500 or 600 square meters. But in their field, it's depth that matters, not width. Underground lie buried remnants of several historical periods.
At this archaeological site, it's not the finds, the specific objects, that are the most interesting, but rather the site itself. You know, it's still always curious, though, to see what the shelves of history have to offer.
A typical monetary find is the phallus. After the 4th century, however, the local coins were devalued because they were minted in such huge numbers. In the 6th century, the Balkans were subject to numerous barbarian invasions, and everyday life here changed significantly. Those Roman lamps are also from the 6th century. This is probably an erotic motif, not very typical of Christianity. The Aedicula is a typical pre-Christian temple. The thumb of a marble statue, a piece of pottery, clay weights from a warp-weighted loom, bones from a cow, a horse, swine, and suckling pigs. Obviously, remains from a culinary feast from the 1st or 2nd century, a Turkish toilet from the 18th century. Along with the hedonism of antiquity, we find signs of today's dolce vita.
The current project will enrich the collection of interesting artifacts from the ancient history of Sofia.
Not many cities in the world have such a rich past and diverse. It's sad and unfortunate that during the communist era, the people in power did not appreciate this remarkable treasure.
The communist approach to archaeology resembled the totalitarian approach to architecture. It was all about megalomaniac projects. Instead of excavating, they erected monstrous concrete models of fortresses, organized light shows, and published propaganda leaflets. The excavations themselves were secondary, at best. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, Bulgaria has been shaking for 20 years in a state of economic and political instability. In a country which struggles with the present day and is afraid of the future, it is quite impossible for the past to become a priority. Archaeology is still mainly a means of cheap advertising. But today, Sofia has a chance of uncovering its own Rome. It is one of the 27 capitals in the European Union. The 5 good emperors would probably be pleased with the ideals that their European successors pursue: authority without repression. And the Western Gate will be the most attractive place in any city in the Eastern Roman Empire. All roads will always lead to Rome.